There's a specific type of person who remembers rewinding a VHS tape before returning it to Blockbuster, and also remembers the exact week they downloaded their first MP3. Not someone who only knows streaming. Not someone who never touched a cassette. Someone who lived through both back-to-back right in the middle of figuring out who they were. If you were born between 1976 and 1985, psychologists have spent decades unsure what to do with you. And that confusion turns out to be very revealing in 2014. Sociologist Sarah Stanorb named this group for the first time. Xennials, a microgeneration born between 1977 and 1985, sitting in the gap between Gen X and Millennials. Some researchers also call them the Oregon Trail generation, after the old computer game many of you played in school. Always navigating uncertain terrain with limited supplies, figuring out the next move as you went. It's a more accurate description than it sounds. Most generational research works in broad windows. Boomers, Gen X, Millennials, Gen Z, Xennials are maybe 8 or 9 years wide. That's not a generation. That's a very specific moment in time. And what happened inside that moment left a mark that broader categories simply can't explain. Not because this group is special in some superior sense, but because of what happened and, more importantly, when. Think about what life actually looked like before the internet existed. You passed notes in class on folded paper that could get confiscated. You made plans to meet someone at a specific corner at a specific time, then went there and waited. No way to check if they were running late. You either showed up or you didn't, and people remembered which one you were. If you missed a TV show, it was just gone. You asked a friend to describe what happened and spent the rest of the week imagining it. And your mistakes, that fight at a party, that embarrassing thing you said in front of the wrong person, that phase in 9th grade, it faded. Nobody archived it. Nobody screenshotted it. It lived in a few people's memories and slowly dissolved into something softer. The way memories do when nothing is there to keep them sharp. The brain is actually built for exactly this. To let things shift over time, keep what still matters. Release what doesn't. Growing up in a world that allowed that process meant your childhood could become a story, not a permanent file you had to live inside forever. Then, right as you were moving into your late teens and early 20s, the entire world changed. Not slowly, practically overnight. Email, mobile phones, Fster, MySpace, broadband. Within a few years, the world you grew up in essentially stopped existing, and a completely different one appeared in its place. Research in Nature Neuroscience found that the part of the brain responsible for learning new systems keeps developing until around age 25. You hit the entire digital revolution inside that window. Old enough to remember clearly what came before. Young enough that your brain was still genuinely open to what replaced it. Gen Xers had to learn the internet the way an adult learns a second language. Functional, sometimes fluent, but never quite effortless. Younger millennials in Gen Z grew up inside it. For them, the internet isn't a tool they picked up. It's the water they swim in. You're the only group who holds both. You remember what it felt like to leave the house and be genuinely unreachable for hours. And you also move through 17 different messaging platforms without anxiety. Not because you're exceptional, because the door was open at exactly the right moment and then it closed. But there's a part of this that almost nobody talks about. You entered the job market around the bust in the early 2000s. First real jobs, first apartments, first real attempt at building a life, and the floor dropped almost immediately. You rebuilt slowly, carefully, and just as you were reaching your most stable years, 2008 happened. Economists call this a scarring effect. Financial instability in your early career leaves a mark that doesn't disappear when things improve, and you can see it in small, quiet decisions. The emergency fund that never feels large enough. The backup plan is built even when there's no obvious reason to need one. The slight hesitation before committing to something permanent, even when everything looks fine. That's not anxiety. It's closer to muscle memory. Your body remembering something your mind has already moved past. If you've noticed that pattern in yourself and never knew where it came from, now you do. Here's something worth pausing on, because not all of this is strength. You often end up as the natural translator in any room between older colleagues who want process and hierarchy and younger ones who want speed and autonomy. Between the generation that gets anxious about new technology and the generation that's never known anything else. That position looks like an asset, and it often is. But being the person who bridges every gap means constantly absorbing friction between two sides, making things function, smoothing things over without anyone asking what that cost you. Psychologists call this emotional labor, and people who carry it habitually tend to stop noticing they're doing it. It stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like just how things are, which makes it very easy to miss how much it's actually taking. If you've spent years being the reliable one and felt a tiredness underneath that you couldn't quite locate, that's not a personality trait. That's what it costs to hold things together for a long time without putting them down. So come back to that VHS tape for a second. The person who rewound it before returning it and then figured out MP3s a few years later didn't do that because they were especially adaptable. They did it because they had no other choice. The world changed, and they changed with it without drama, without losing the version of themselves that existed before. That's quieter than it sounds and rarer than most people realize. You watched a world end, not with an announcement, not with a clear before and after, just slowly. Then suddenly, the way things change when you're not watching directly, and then you watched another one begin. Old enough to know what was being left behind, young enough to move into what came next without getting stuck at the border. Most people get one world, you got the seam. The exact place where one version of human life stitched into a completely different one. And you learn not as a lesson, just by living that who you are doesn't have to be determined by the world you started in. In a time when the ground keeps shifting for everyone, the people who have already practiced landing on their feet when it moved without losing track of where they came from carry something that can't really be taught, only lived through.